Picture a teenage girl in London's Paddington neighborhood, restless and hungry for a life bigger than her family's cramped flat and her father's modest job. Her name is Edith Louisa Hawkes, but she won't keep it for long. She's got dreams that refuse to stay small, and in her imagination, she's already gliding through bright lights and smoky applause. Someone far more daring, far more glamorous. At 15, she packs a bag, steps out onto the street, and effectively says goodbye to her past. By the time she's done, she will be revered, reviled, envied, and dismissed by turns, parading through West End stages and Hollywood parties under a new name, Sylvia Ashley. She will marry into one of Britain's most aristocratic families, wed American movie royalty twice, claim a noble title for herself even after divorces, and end up interred not too far from a legendary silent film star she once called husband. She was born on April 1st, 1904, at 112 Hall Place in Paddington. Her parents, Arthur Hawkes and Edith Florence Hyde, had little to no glimmer of high-born connections. Arthur worked as a porter, a doorman, sometimes at livery stables, roles with no pomp but plenty of labor. The neighborhood was one of London's more humdrum enclaves, and though the city offered excitements, the Hawkes family had few luxuries. By 1910, they'd moved to Warncliffe Gardens in Lisson Grove, a shift in location that did little to move them up in social rank. This was their reality: cramped housing, limited prospects, frugal dinners. Nobody looking in would guess that their eldest daughter would later rebrand herself as a princess. Edith, sometimes Eddie Lou to her friends, had a younger sister, Lillian Vera, born 1910, who would eventually marry a film producer named Basil Bleck. The sisters grew up in each other's orbits, with Vera forging a more subdued path, while Edith began dabbling in small modeling gigs at a young age. If you sift through dusty birth registries, you'll find Edith Louisa Hawkes, plainly recorded in 1904, but by her late teens she was shaving a couple of years off her birth date, insisting she'd come into the world in 1906. She also dropped the name Edith in favor of Sylvia, perhaps because it sounded more fashionable, more romantic, and more distant from the plain upbringing she sought to escape. She was all of 15 when she left home, determined to carve out a glamorous destiny. With limited education beyond the basics, she had to rely on her looks, wit, and nerve. She started as a lingerie model, a job that involved strutting in delicate undergarments for catalogs or small fashion shows. It was hardly highbrow, but it was a start, and it gave her a sense of confidence she never lost. Soon enough, she managed to join the Cochrane Dancers, a British group akin to America's famous Ziegfeld Follies. The Cochrane Dancers provided rousing entertainment for the city's night owls, featuring glittering costumes, carefully rehearsed routines, and the swirl of a nightlife that promised more excitement than anything the teenage Edith, now Sylvia, had ever experienced. London's West End called next, and she made her debut in a show called Midnight Follies in 1924. Most people didn't notice this new chorus girl among the mass of dancers, but she gained enough traction to appear in productions like Primrose, 1924, and Tell Me More, 1925, which gave her a taste for performing. She even popped up in comedic acts, forming a duo with the American writer Dorothy Fields under the banner Silly and Dotty. They performed at the London Metropole's version of the Midnight Follies, two bright-faced women delivering comedic banter to crowds who may not have realized how shrewd Sylvia was becoming at milking every opportunity. There's a moment from that time that feels almost too audacious to be true. She auditioned for Primrose, and when asked to sing, she brazenly launched into a long version of God Save the King. P.G. Wodehouse and Guy Bolton later recounted the incident, marveling at how her tactic forced everyone in the theater, director, producers, stagehands, to stand at attention until she finished. This was the kind of cheeky, self-assured stunt that signaled her innate boldness. Even as a relative nobody, she sensed that causing a stir might propel her forward. It's easy to imagine the director rolling his eyes, but also remembering this brazen young chorus girl who was willing to wield the national anthem as a personal audition weapon. Sylvia's father died sometime in her 20s. The exact date is fuzzy. As are many details of her early life, she seemed to erase and rewrite entire chapters to suit her new image. Yet she re-emerged on official documents listing him as a gentleman rather than a porter. It was an early clue about her determination to refashion not just herself, but her entire background. Reinvention was part of her DNA, from the name change to the birth year fib, and it would shape every decision she made going forward. She understood, in a way that might have been shocking for a girl from Lisson Grove, that the difference between a life of comfort and a life of drudgery often hinged on appearances and social ties. The big break in her social climb arrived on February 3, 1927, when she married Anthony Ashley Cooper, known as Lord Ashley, the heir apparent to the 9th Earl of Shaftesbury. She was 22, and he was aristocracy incarnate. It was a union that scandalized his family. He was from a prestigious line that traced back centuries, and she was a chorus girl from a working-class background. The 9th Earl disapproved so strongly that he couldn't hide his disdain, even publicly. Gossip columns ate it up, the gorgeous dancer from the West End hooking the future Earl, bridging an impossible class divide. Skeptics whispered that she was a gold digger, but others admired her audacity. The marriage didn't last, not in any meaningful sense. By her own account, Sylvia left Lord Ashley within a year, fed up with his infidelities, though outsiders suspected her ambitions also played a role. She liked the title Lady Ashley, which she continued to use even after they formally divorced in 1934. The aristocracy found this galling. They complained that she was capitalizing on a name she no longer had a right to, but Sylvia knew the power in a name. Lady Sylvia Ashley opened doors in high society, and she wasn't about to forfeit that on principle. Her newfound title ushered her into exclusive parties and gatherings, setting the stage for what came next. Crossing paths with Douglas Fairbanks Sr., he was at the tail end of an iconic Hollywood career, famous for The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and numerous other swashbuckling roles that made him a beloved silent film star. He also happened to be married to Mary Pickford, the original America's Sweetheart, with whom he was entangled in a messy divorce process. Sylvia met Fairbanks in 1933, and the tabloids zeroed in immediately. Everyone wanted to know the state of his marriage to Mary. Suddenly, Sylvia found herself labeled the other woman. By the time Fairbanks's divorce went through, the scandal was white hot. Sylvia's romance with him was out in the open, and many fans blamed her for dismantling the beloved Mary and Doug fantasy. On March 7, 1936, Sylvia and Douglas Fairbanks Sr. married, swirling together Hollywood sparkle and British flamboyance. She was around 32, he was 52, and the press had a field day. Some labeled Sylvia a blatant fortune hunter. Others considered the whole spectacle a real-life fairy tale, just like the movies that Fairbanks starred in. The couple jetted around the world, dining with dignitaries, sailing on extravagant yachts, and attending glitzy soirees. For a moment, it seemed like Sylvia had reached the pinnacle, a star on her arm, a shining social spotlight, a place among Hollywood's elite. Yet behind the photo ops, shadows were lengthening. Fairbanks's health was failing, undermined by decades of intense work, partying, and the emotional stress of his divorce from Mary. In December 1939, just 3 years into their marriage, Fairbanks suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of 56. He died in Santa Monica, leaving Sylvia a widow at 35, though the official record put her at 33, if you believed her birth year revision. She was at his bedside when it happened. Reports mention she was devastated and wept openly, a scene that must have been gut-wrenching, especially when the public was quick to blame her for contributing to his stress. She'd inherited part of his estate, but a wave of negative sentiment swept in from Mary Pickford's fans, who saw Sylvia as an unwelcome intruder. In the wake of his death, she found herself alone, financially somewhat secure but under emotional siege. Hollywood, for its part, was enthralled by the drama. The silver screen legend dead, his widow newly minted, under scrutiny. She tried to maintain her composure, traveling frequently between Los Angeles and London, wearing her Lady Ashley moniker like protective armor. She also cultivated a circle of high-profile friends, actress Constance Bennett among them, and immersed herself in philanthropic efforts. On March 1st, 1941, along with her sister Vera Bleck, Bennett, and Virginia Fox Zanuck, Sylvia helped found the British Distressed Areas Fund in Los Angeles, raising money for refugees affected by World War II. For a brief window, the headlines about her turned charitable. She became known for hosting lavish fundraisers, using her celebrity connections to rally donations. It was an unexpected moment of sincerity in a life that was usually thick with gossip. Then came more upheaval. Sylvia married Edward Stanley, the 6th Baron Stanley of Alderley, in January 1944. One might guess this union looked good on paper. She had her old Lady Ashley background, now a widow of a Hollywood idol, and he was a British nobleman. But the marriage rapidly deteriorated, dissolving in a torrent of divorce proceedings by 1945 and finalizing in 1948. The press seized the chance to brand her a serial bride, someone who leapt from man to man, from meltdown to meltdown, always chasing wealth or titles or both. Not one to stay single for long, Sylvia soon met Clark Gable, fresh off his heartbreak from Carole Lombard's 1942 death in a plane crash. Gable was the king of Hollywood, still revered for Gone with the Wind and other hits. They crossed paths in 1948 at a party thrown by Gable's agent. Sylvia was 45, Gable was 48, and though their ages aligned well enough, the relationship was overshadowed by the fact that Gable still mourned Lombard deeply. Fans had adored Lombard's vivacious spirit, and many had trouble accepting any new woman in Gable's life, particularly one with Sylvia's track record. Their engagement stirred controversy, with a swirl of talk about whether Sylvia was merely capitalizing on Gable's grief and fame. They married on December 20th, 1949, in a small ceremony at a ranch near Santa Barbara. The union quickly revealed itself to be a mismatch of lifestyles. Gable preferred a certain down-to-earth atmosphere, while Sylvia never hid her taste for refined gatherings and society dinners. In 1951, she sued Gable for divorce, citing mental cruelty, a move that shocked Hollywood watchers. Gable's fans turned on her with a fury, seeing her as the villain in a story where Gable was the stoic, grieving star. The divorce was finalized in 1952, with Sylvia walking away with a financial settlement, but an even harsher reputation in the eyes of the tabloids. Headlines like Gable sued for divorce, mental cruelty charged, painted her as the relentless aggressor. In 1941, we see her engaged in philanthropic endeavors, raising money for the war-torn communities in Europe. She also, for a fleeting moment, considered forging a stable partnership with French actor Jean Gabin, and at another time with fashion designer Oleg Cassini. Neither relationship lasted, but they added to her mystique, an endless parade of powerful or famous men drifting into her orbit, presumably enchanted by her beauty and charm. Some say she had a comedic streak that made her delightful at parties, telling witty stories from her West End days. In 1954, she entered what would be her fifth and final marriage to Dmitri Georgiadze, a Georgian man who styled himself as Prince Dmitri Georgiadze. He was a hotelier and race car driver, someone with a dash of adventure about him, which might have appealed to Sylvia's restless nature. The public hardly noticed at first. By then, her star was waning. She never divorced Georgiadze, but sources suggest they lived mostly apart, estranged in every sense but legally. Sylvia kept using the name Princess Sylvia Georgiadze, continuing her habit of holding on to lofty titles for as long as possible. Not everyone believed Dmitri was a true prince. Some saw it as a case of two brand-conscious individuals who found each other. But the marriage, lacking the drama of the Gable or Fairbanks alliances, rarely made the papers. By the 1950s, Sylvia's name was no longer the hot scandal. Hollywood was focusing on a new generation of starlets. Even so, tragedies and losses continued to shape her. She had no children from any of her marriages, a personal regret she seldom voiced in public, but reportedly confided to close friends. The 1940s through the 1960s tested her financially as well. Settlements from divorces only stretched so far, especially with her taste for elaborate homes in Los Angeles and the occasional flat in London. Some of her wealth came from the estates of her late husbands, some from prenuptial agreements, but each passing year chipped away at her fortune. By the 1960s and 70s, as new faces dominated tabloids, Sylvia retreated from the spotlight. She was getting older, closer to 70 than 50. Her health began to slip, culminating in a devastating diagnosis of bone cancer in the early 1970s. She was 73 when she died on June 29, 1977. Her funeral was small, with a scattering of old friends and her sister Vera in attendance. She had insisted on being interred under the name Princess Sylvia Georgiadze, as if she couldn't bear to relinquish her final borrowed title even in death. She chose Hollywood Forever Cemetery, fitting since her second husband, Douglas Fairbanks Sr., was one of Tinseltown's earliest and brightest legends. She now lies just 680 feet north of him in what's called the Garden of Legends. Today, if you read about her at all, it's often in footnotes in the biographies of Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, or Clark Gable, small references to a woman who married them, who caused some drama, then disappeared. Her philanthropic efforts for refugees during World War II seldom get much attention, nor does the complexity of her family background. But if you dig deeper, you find a portrait of a woman who lived multiple lifetimes in one go. From lingerie model to West End chorus girl, to titled lady to Hollywood widow, to princess in a grand cemetery. She soared higher than most from her class, but that flight came at enormous personal cost. From repeated divorces and public scorn to lonely final days. In many ways, it's the quintessential story of a 20th century socialite who broke barriers and hearts in equal measure. And so we're left with this swirling legacy, the memory of a restless spirit who never settled, constantly shape-shifting and rewriting her own script. Was she a victim of an era that didn't allow women independence outside of marriage? Or was she the architect of her own scandal-laden destiny, forever chasing status at any cost? The truth probably lies in between. Whatever her motivations, Sylvia Ashley made sure no one would forget her, if only in rumor and legend. Her name may not carry the same weight as those of her famous husbands, but she was the thread that linked an English earl's domain to a Hollywood studio, a baron's manor to a yacht in the Pacific, a ranch in Santa Barbara to a prince's fabled identity. She was always on the move, always aiming for the next rung on the ladder, the next swirl of champagne, the next big name to share her life, until she quietly slipped away from a world that had known her by so many different titles. If you ever stroll through Hollywood Forever Cemetery, take a small detour to Section 8, the Garden of Legends. You might spot her grave marked Princess Sylvia Georgiadze, just a short walk from Douglas Fairbanks. It's an oddly poetic place for her final rest, close to the man whose death shaped her young widowhood, and by extension the rest of her life. That gravestone stands as a silent testament to her unwavering knack for spectacle. Even in death, she clung to an image of nobility she had boldly claimed for herself in life. You might see it as one last scandalous flourish from beyond the grave, or maybe just a final statement that nobody, no editor, no aristocratic father-in-law, no Hollywood reporter, would ever define Sylvia Ashley except Sylvia herself.